Hey everyone, it's Lexi. So in today's video, I'll be sharing with you my summer reading recommendations. So these are books that I feel like capture the perfect summer vibe, whether they take place in kind of the hot kind of summer months that kind of mimics what we're kind of feeling here, or I feel like they're just a perfect one to kind of lose yourself in during kind of those long summer days. So they're all over in genre too, which is really fun. So without further ado, let's get started. First up, I have The Paris Library by Skeslien Charles, and this one is a kind of dual perspective historical fiction. So we follow this young girl in Nazi-occupied France during World War II, and she ends up taking a job, her dream job, as a librarian at I think it's the American Library in Paris. Yeah, the American Library in Paris, and she ends up joining the resistance, and it follows her experience kind of growing up during this time period and also kind of fighting back against the Nazis. And then we also have a storyline in the 1980s where we follow this young girl who befriends her elderly French neighbor, and it kind of goes from there where the two stories kind of complement each other. But what makes me think of summer when reading this is that they talk about how hot it is in the library a lot of times, especially in the dead of summer, and I feel like that perfectly captures that, like, you know, hot, sticky, unfun feeling that you have when you are just like kind of, you know, stuck in the heat. And I felt like this book really kind of captured that no air conditioning, no airflow, really dry heat feeling. And this book was really suspenseful. I enjoyed the dual storyline. We obviously can like figure out what the connections are between the past and the present storyline in this one, but it was really fun. I loved how it took place in the library and how learning about how the city and the library had to adapt now that it was being taken control over by Nazi officials. So I thought that was super interesting and a lot of fun, and definitely recommend you check this book out. I don't hear a lot of people talk about this one, so I highly recommend it, especially during these kind of warmer months. Next up, this is one that I feel like perfectly captures that like hot, humid, muggy feeling, and it is The Peach Keeper by Sarah Addison Allen. I read this book over probably 10 years ago, and it is one that really like comes to mind when I think of books that really can capture that like heavy air atmosphere that we get a lot in the summertime. And this one follows this kind of small, very pretentious town, very wealthy town in Georgia, and there's been kind of like this feud between the two kind of affluent families, and so when these people that are kind of like the kids at this point are in their 30s, one of the big kind of family houses that is known for kind of its wealth converts one of their big mansions into an inn, and when they are kind of excavating, they find that there is a skeleton buried under the peach tree, and it kind of goes from there. So basically this one kind of, you know, unravels a lot of the family kind of feud and kind of what led to the fallout, and ultimately how that skeleton ties into the feud between these two families. But again, in addition to kind of like uncovering the mystery of, you know, whose skeleton this is, you know, why it's important, how does this tie to the kind of family feud, this book also, like I said, really captures that like summer, like hot summer atmosphere, that feeling where it's muggy. You can feel the weight of the air around you. You can feel how wet the air is. You can feel how humid it is. And so it's very immersive. I remember reading this, I would have my window open at night reading and kind of, you know, hearing the, you know, the cicadas and all that stuff out. Like, it really helped kind of add to that atmosphere. But I think this book does a really good job at like a character study, looking at this family and their feud over, you know, generations and how that started, and like tying it in with the mystery of, you know, whose skeleton this is. So I thought this one was really fun. Again, not one I hear a lot of people talk about, but definitely one that I highly recommend. This is a well-known book, but I think it is one that I feel like if you're having like a carpool, like if you're going on a car trip this summer, I think this is the perfect audiobook to listen to. I remember I was driving to Rhode Island for a conference and like the Chesapeake Bay area, and it was like an 8-hour drive, and and I started the audiobook and as soon as I pulled into the resort that I was staying at for the conference, I finished this audiobook, and it was so immersive. It didn't feel like an 8-hour audiobook. And so it is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I know some of you may already have heard of this one. This book is already very popular, but I feel like this is really the perfect book if you are, going on a car trip this summer. The audiobook, because the book is written documentary style, so it's just through interviews, and the audiobook does a full cast. Like, a lot of the voices that you hear of these characters are kind of, well-known actors, so it has a very stacked cast when it came to the kind of audiobook. And like I said, because it's just interview style, it's very it's like you're listening to a documentary. It seems so real, and how the author is able to tell the story of this band is really fantastic. So the premise of this book is that we are kind of listening to a audiobook or kind of a documentary of what was known as a very popular band in the 70s called Daisy Jones and the Six. They blew up, they had a very successful album, and then they had a massive fallout. So this is following the band several decades after that event, recounting their early lives, how they formed the band and what ultimately led to the fallout. This book was incredibly moving, and it just really grips you. And like I said, I think if you're having a car ride, like a road trip, I think this is the perfect audiobook. And I think it's so, even with people with different likes, I think can really enjoy this, and it's so immersive. So like I said, this is kind of my road trip audiobook recommendation for the summer. So next up, this was the book that I gave 5 stars, and it was one of the first books I read this year, and it's definitely going to be one of my favorites that I read this year, but I just can't talk about this book enough. And it is A Resistance of Witches by Morgan Ryan. This book really took me by surprise, and I loved it. Like I said, I gave it 5 stars, but it takes place it's like a alternate, or I guess it's historical fiction with fantastical elements. So we follow this witch's school that has always been secluded, or kind of kept itself separate from the kept itself separate from the UK. It's never really interfered with anything related to the humans. But during World War II, the headmistress of the witches' school offers their resources and services to Winston Churchill to help with the war effort. And so we follow our young protege, who's basically the main person that the headmaster is training and kind of helping with these war efforts. So she is kind of like a seer. She can touch an object and kind of see, who that object belonged to, where that object is at, kind of the touch memory, I guess, of that object. And so she's tasked with trying to find this long lost book that the Nazis are trying to find, and it has a collection of dark magic spells that the Nazis can use to kind of eradicate their enemies. And so there's really a kind of time sensitive rush to get this going, and it kind of goes from there. This book really took me by surprise. I was not expecting to love it as much as I did. I loved especially because I do love historical fiction. I think that's why I really enjoyed it, but this is an era of history that I just find so incredibly interesting, and I loved having the kind of fantasy witches magics aspect kind of integrated into it. So you hear a lot of, obviously we hear about Hitler, but Himmel and all the other major Nazi SS officers are somewhat mentioned in here, and I thought that was just really fun and interesting. This book also really kind of tugs on your heartstrings, and it doesn't shy away from having really hard and kind of very tragic things happen to the characters. I just felt very anxious for them, but all the characters were so fleshed out. They were really dynamic, and you can't help but root for them, and they just end up in such horrible situations. And so this book really took me by surprise, and I loved it. So I just want to recommend this enough. I feel like this one, even you can read this any time of year, but basically this is me saying that you need to read this now. And lastly, this might be a little bit too on the nose, but it is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. And this book is, I think, one of my favorites of hers so far, but basically it tells the premise of these two people, and they feel like they are the ones that they break up with someone, and then their like ex ends up, you know, finding the person that they're going to marry. So they're just basically kind of a stepping stone for their, you know, partner to find someone that, you know, they're going to end up with. And so these people feel like they're cursed, and they're like, you know what, I think in order to break the curse, we need to, you know, date each other just for the summer, and hopefully then it will kind of break the curse and we can kind of go from there. And obviously you can see they kind of, you know, fall in love from there. So this one I really enjoyed. This was my first kind of foray into this author, and I've read all her other like companion ones with this one, and then the other one is Say You'll Remember Me, like companion series. So I really enjoy it. I feel like this is the perfect book. I think it really captures kind of, I believe it's Minnesota for this, you know, summertime. Because it does take place in the summer, it really feels like the perfect beach read. There's like, you know, enjoying time at, you know, the lake, you know, doing summer things, going out for dinner, you know, just the sun setting so much later, and like that vibe that you have during summer, I think this book really captures. Similar to how this author works is there's always a dog, and then there's always, you know, tough family situations. I will say like some of the family issues did feel like a little bit unbelievable and kind of ridiculous a little bit. So it was a little bit, you kind of have to suspend your belief a little bit, and it just got to the point where there's just like, I know, one thing after another. So I feel like that's just how her books kind of work. But if you're able to look past it, this is a really fun kind of read, and, you know, I definitely really enjoyed. I think it's a perfect summer, you know, beach read. That's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what some of your favorite summer reads are and all that fun stuff. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.